I'm sure you've heard many woodworkers say that the table saw is the heart of their shop, and I guess I kind of would say the same. It is in the center of my shop. There are a few operations that I always use the table saw for. One of those is ripping down long stock. Um, this really, if you're dealing with a really long board, it really can't be done very effectively with a circular saw. And of course, they have those. They have the hand rip saws, but as strange as it might sound when I say this, I didn't really get into woodworking so that I could pump a saw all day. So I have a table saw. When I bought this table saw, and I'm sure, well, you may or may not have noticed by now, the manufacturer of this table saw is Ryobi. And they're already known to be manufacturers of lower end power tools. And that's not really such a big deal because they do actually have some models that are pretty functional. They have I believe, a $300 or $400 model with fence extensions and a much more accurate fence than this. But we'll talk about that fence in a second. The problem is me and my infinite wisdom, I purchased the cheapest power tool I could find, and there's kind of a theory out there that you can spend less on your power tools as long as you still get a good blade, and that's kind of what I bought into. And for the most part, it is true. Um, the uh, the blade, as long as I have a good blade on here, because I'm repurposing this old pine from my deck, I put on the factory blade. But as long as you have a good blade on here, you can get pretty clean cuts. And I don't know how well this will transfer to the camera, but I mean there's a pretty smooth cut here, and that was with the factory blade. Um, and so you can imagine the kind of clean cuts that I can get with the higher end blade. Um, as long as you have the power to push the blade, the blade's the one doing the cutting. The blade is responsible for for how good that cut is. The problem is precision, and that's really where this table saw sucks. With this table saw, I found that the fence. See, it wasn't very hard for me to actually skew that a little bit, and it skewed maybe just an estimation, maybe about 2 or 3 degrees. And you know that might not sound like a lot, but when you're trying to make a good, accurate square cut, that just won't do. And on top of that, you have the situation where it's not very safe. And the reason for that is when you're ripping down long stock, if you are narrow on the back side between the blade and the fence, then you have your stock as it's getting cut, it gets pinched between the blade and the fence. And when that happens, you have a real likelihood of kickback. So so to avoid kickback, you want to make sure that the fence is parallel with the blade. And you're not even very safe if you're skewed the other direction, because you're trying to get a good parallel cut, you'll be putting some pressure on your workpiece against the fence, and that's just so you can get that good accurate cut. But the problem with that is if you're skewed the other way and you're narrow here and wide here, when you're putting that pressure against the piece you're working, you can actually cause the kickback yourself by putting pressure on the backside of your workpiece against the blade. And because this blade spins this way, guess where that board's headed? Right into the old hip. But this is kind of a good thing right now. I hate this saw, but while I'm sitting here talking to you about it, I kind of made a promise for this blog that I would cover my successes and my failures. And this was a big failure for me when I bought this saw. There's certain things that I can do to improve this saw, but all in all, this is not a great saw for woodworking. If I was just cutting trim or a lot of the housework, a lot of the construction work that I've been having to do on my home over the past year. This table saw is great for that. For woodworking and good accurate cuts, where we need good square cuts and accurate accurate 45 degrees for miters and everything. If I'm it just sucks for accuracy. I really can't put it any better than that. So when Santa Claus decides I've been good enough for a new table saw, then I'll have a new table saw. Excuse me. But before that, there are some improvements that we can make. I'm not going to go away from a contractor saw. In a small shop like mine, and you've seen the size, it really is convenient to have a saw that's fairly easy to move. And so I'm not going to move away from a contractor saw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a base for this. And that brings up another issue I have with this saw, is that it's very light and it really can't stand up under its own weight. And when I'm ripping a long board and I'm starting back there and I'm coming this way, this thing is walking across the floor. And when I was ripping down some of this stock to 2x4 dimensions, the fence would maybe walk maybe a foot to 2 foot while I was going. Thankfully, it never fell down, and eventually I had enough of that stock to kind of brace it in the back using my sawhorses. So right now it's pretty strong, but that's kind of part of the what I'll dub the Dirt Simple workbench, is that it's not only going to serve the purpose of a workbench, but it's also going to be my outfeed table for this table saw, and it's going to serve as a brace, just as the stock is right now, for the saw itself. Also, I'm going to add to the weight and try to bring down some of the vibration by building a base for this table saw. And I'm kind of playing with the idea of locking wheels so that I would be able to move it out of the way whenever I need the floor space for cutting down plywood with the circular saw and so on. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Fail number one. Here you go. Like so many woodworkers that find themselves setting up a new shop, I come into the shop and I kind of have a seat and daydream about the kind of setup that I'd like to have. What kind of storage do I want here, and what kind of new tool do I want there? So let's go ahead and run through some of my daydreams. Starting again with the west wall, I'll be relocating my daughter's workbench and of course clearing out the lumber in the corner. It won't be gone long, as the first project on this wall will be a lumber storage solution. I haven't settled on a definite design, but one of the requirements will be a tuck behind slot for plywood and other sheet goods. I would also like to place my miter saw here. I'm looking at a few different plans for wall-mounted miter saw stations. The requirements will include strength to support the saw and any size lumber I happen to be working. At the south wall, I have the benefit of a large window, and it would be a shame to waste that natural light. This will be the eventual location of my final workbench. It will be the last in the series of shop furniture I will be building, and the culmination of all the things I will have learned at that point. The rest of the shop is still under planning, as I still want to incorporate a better routing table and planer and a joiner. Before I close out this episode, I want to go ahead and introduce you to the project for the next episode. I've already mentioned the Dirt Simple workbench, and if you haven't had the good fortune to read the book Workbenches by Christopher Schwartz, you want to go ahead and read that to get on the same page as I am for this, because it really is a great resource, and it really describes some of the things that some of the ideas that people have lost over the years for workbenches. But one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was how he described a workbench as a three-dimensional clamping surface. And we can do that. We can do that with the tools that I have. In his book, he offers two plans, an English workbench and a French workbench. And if you want to build one of those, more power to you. I'm actually a little jealous. But with the tools that I have, I'm going to kind of deviate from that, but stay in the same spirit. So if you're interested and you want to follow along, leave your comments, and please make suggestions. I'm open for suggestions, and I will be throughout the rest of this. Happy woodworking, and I'll see you then.